Good morning, George and Nora. Thank you so much for doing this with us
Yeah.
today.
Good morning, Michelle.
So, as you know, I expressed an interest in really getting to know the experiences of our residents as it relates to civil and human right activities, to understand sort of your experience, your motivations, and maybe some perspective on what we can do now as a society or as a community or individuals. And I thought that it would be nice to hear you both have a discussion amongst yourselves. Do it a little bit differently. In other cases I've been interviewing, but this will be a nice discussion for you two to have. So why don't you introduce yourselves and then take it from there.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Nora Brown, and George and I are married together. And
Still?
yes, yeah, right. And you never really told me very much about your first protest.
Right. Well, had to scratch my brain to go back to the beginnings, but the first one I can remember was I was at the university, and it was the Sharpeville Massacre in South Africa. It seems so long ago now. It was 60 years ago when 69 people were gunned down, many shot in the back, as they raced against the apartheid military and police in Sharpeville, South Africa. And that prompted protests around the world. And our group in Toronto marched on the South African consulate, not a huge group. And I think of it now, it's it's 60 years ago, and a tiny speck of a protest in the larger efforts to break apartheid, which took decades. But it was successful, and I think a message for now, for me at least, is that it takes a long time and continuous effort, and one little march or one little protest ain't going to do it. So, moving on from that, we're skipping over a number of things, but we were overseas in the 60s, so we missed all the civil rights action here. But we got back to New York, and the next big one that we came up with was the March Against the Iraq War in Washington in 2002, just before Bush and company, 2001 I guess, just before Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld and company launched their war on Iraq. And Nora and I joined good friends in New York, and hundreds of thousands in Washington.
And we drove down, I remember that.
And several 100,000 people, including, you remember that Veterans Against the War group?
Yes, I do.
They were so powerful and militant. And the striking thing then is that the war took off. Our protest march was barely buried in page 25 or something of the New York Times. We were ignored. It's as if it didn't exist. And it goes to show, for now, I don't know, that the power of media collaborating with protest is hugely important.
Yeah.
Then the New York Times was totally bought in by the Bush, Cheney, and Colin Powell story of the fiction, rather, of the causes of.
Did you say depiction or fiction?
I said fiction.
Fiction. That's what I thought you said.
What else? What else do you remember about that?
Yeah. Well, I remember being so committed, so strongly. You can't do this war. You cannot have this war. And we weren't alone. All our friends and many people were saying no. And so we went down to protest. And I remember. I mean, it was so clear. Colin Powell was lying. It's just so clear. And we drove down, and I remember the police were extremely polite and kind and helping us and smiling, and it was very unusual, I thought.
But there was a lot of armed police or military people lining the government buildings as we walked along.
Yes. And I remember as we were walking, a lot of us walking, lined with buildings, office buildings, and I remember looking up, and the people in the office buildings were looking down at us, the workers, in offices, And I thought, yeah, why aren't you here? Why aren't you doing it? Yeah, it was important, as you say. There was no media, but it was so important that happened.
So again, applying to today, the way the media has been totally in lockstep, if you like, with the protesters, is enormously important. So Nora, just to move along, the next one we had thought about talking about was the incredible Women's March.
Oh, the Million Women's March, yes, in D.C.
In
that's
D.C.
right.
in 2006.
Yeah. Oh, that was
2017, just after Trump's inaugural.
Yeah.
A week after Trump's inaugural.
Yeah.
There was 1 million of us, and I was very proud to be accompanied by 3 generations of brown women, Nora and our daughter Lisanne and our then 16-year-old granddaughter
yeah.
Ella.
She was, yeah, a 16-year-old. There were lots of families with, husbands, the whole family presenting themselves in protest.
In protest of Trump.
In protest of Trump, yeah. But the Women's March was more than that, wasn't that?
Yeah.
Was that women's rights as well?
Absolutely.
The right to choose, the right to have rights, full rights.
Equal pay.
Equal pay, and it was the most wonderful, peaceful community already. A million community.
Right. We could barely move.
Yeah,
we never got to the podium to hear the
No, it
speakers.
didn't matter. It didn't matter.
It didn't matter.
No, there was so much interaction and quality interaction, and with the children and the husbands or the men, whoever they were so supportive.
Now again, to move along, Nora.
Yeah.
Well, I do have a question about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
Do you see an opportunity for something like that to happen now, related to the black and white issue and the racism and equality? I mean, do you think that there's an opportunity that a march like that could happen now? And do you think, for example, your granddaughter would want to be involved in that?
Oh, I think so.
I think she would,
yeah.
if she could break away from the
from COVID.
From COVID,
Right.
Right.
That's a good thought. I think it would be good to wait a little bit because the protests in Washington have been going
Yeah,
on.
you don't want to
and
dissipate
the
any of
temperature
that.
might just be cooling a little bit now as Trump has finally agreed to remove the military force around his bunker in the White House. But I think maybe to keep it going.
Yeah,
Again,
yeah,
coming back to
absolutely.
this apartheid protest, to keep it going. Maybe maybe in the fall. I don't know.
Yeah.
At a slightly later time, I think it's a great idea.
Right.
Michelle, you should lead that idea.
Listen, this is all about getting ideas. It's all about
That's right.
figuring out
Yes,
what
yes,
have you
exactly.
done that we can now learn from.
Right.
Yeah.
What
right.
worked, what was a challenge, what can we do here at Woodland Pond,
Yeah.
individually and as a community.
Yes.
Right.
And then in the New Paltz area and the Ulster County and on and on and on. But go ahead.
Well,
Yeah.
the next one we had was really Nora's. And that was something
yes.
called the Weather Project.
Yes.
But to describe that.
Yeah, at the time we had our country place in Pennsylvania, just near the river.
Delaware River.
Right
Right near
Delaware
Sullivan County.
River, and near Narrowsburg, and we were in Beach Lake. In any case,
Beach Lake
Oh,
Bakery.
you're in Beach Lake.
We were a mile
Bakery.
from Beach Lake Bakery. We connected with them and with John and Libby, or reconnected with John at the Beach Lake Bakery.
Isn't that funny?
I know,
It's
and John and Libby were instrumental in us being here.
Oh.
So we celebrated yesterday with them on a Zoom with our 1 year anniversary of being at Woodland Pond. An eagle, 2 eagles, 3 eagles. Oh my goodness. Anyway, so I was involved in a theater company about half an hour away in Highland, New York. Not this Highland, obviously, but Highland. And they were developing, they wanted to do something for climate. And so they wanted to use the word climate, but they were not allowed to do that in the name. So it was called the Weather Project. But everything inside that name was about the climate. And so there were musicians, and there was a teenage rock and roll band. It was fantastic, and a full orchestra, and it was a story that was devised from children, a project for children in school. And so the teenagers were leading that, were then the next age group is middle school, and then the little ones, and everybody participated. And it was performed, and all ages, going up to, I don't know, 100. And in any case, it was done in the big open space. And we had our first performance in, what was that? The ballpark.
In Ulan,
in New York. Was it a double or triple size?
No, it was a big baseball stadium.
Big, huge.
Not stadium, but
field.
space.
Yeah. And so you're running and singing and speaking your lines, and I was so lucky because I was a cloud. There were two of us, and we sort of oversaw everything and ran everything. And I had a motorcycle. Like, my character's name, I just remembered it, was Nimbula. And I was able to create all of that myself, and my partner as well. And so it was thrilling. We did, it was mostly out of doors, and there were stilters, and we performed at SUNY Sullivan in their theater.
It was outdoors.
Was it outdoors?
And so the purpose of that was to raise awearness about climate.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
yes.
challenges.
Oh, I mean, we were screaming and singing and dancing, about weather. And great. George saw every performance because he had to drive me to the locations. So it was absolutely unbelievable.
And you came to Brooklyn.
And we performed in Brooklyn. What was that?
I don't know exactly.
I don't remember. It was a stage.
Yeah.
A stage space, and that was very successful.
Yeah, I mean, so that just goes to show that there's other ways that you can raise awareness about things.
Exactly.
So, I think mostly, I try to think so much about how can we elevate this conversation with my children and their peer group. But something like that. So if there was to be a school program that was like a traveling school program that brought to the children something about, race and equality, and you could literally have a troupe of a traveling troupe that goes into the schools. Because the children won't necessarily understand the marching or the protests, and they certainly aren't going to understand the looting and the more violent images, but maybe they could learn through
be part of it, create it.
Absolutely.
These little kids, they created their own scripts, part of their script.
Right.
And the teenagers, they all worked together beautifully. It was really.
You spent months developing it.
Oh, a long time, and it was always in process because people would leave.
Right.
That's the only catch. If you can have a core.
Right.
And my partner and I, we were a core part of that, so we would be able to lead things in terms of the script and whatnot. But the kids.
Can I ask you a question about the apartheid? Going back to that for a second.
Yeah.
Do you remember how you got involved?
The Sharpeville event was.
You were in medical school.
I was in medical school.
Yeah.
Not unlike the knee on George Floyd. I mean, it was like that, except we didn't have the same images that horrible event in Minneapolis was.
So it hit the newspapers here and hit the newsreel here.
Oh yeah, and of course the opposition to apartheid had already been going on for a good number of years, but it was reaching crescendo at that point, and Sharpeville was so dramatic. 69 people gunned down and hundreds injured by the troops.
In the back. That's
A
so
lot of people
Trump, isn't it?
Were
killed
they-
in the back as they ran away from the police.
So they were killed by police.
Yeah.
Military
Yeah.
force.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
The people that were killed were black,
Yes,
and they were shot in the back.
yes.
Oh, gosh.
Well, a lot of them were, yeah. And then hundreds wounded. I mean, not just the 69 killed. So it was a horrible massacre. And that event, it's funny. I had to go back and look it up on Google to remind myself exactly what happened. It's exactly 60 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's really telling.
That's
you know,
right.
And
That's right.
it really brings this to the forefront. And
That's right. That's right.
I just wonder, I've asked a number of people this. I mean, obviously here in America, some progress has been made in terms of anti-discrimination laws and things like that, but I still feel we have a ways to go.
Oh, way ways to go. And one other thing about that, we didn't, of course, have anything like like cell phones, far from it.
Right.
But the cell phone is so important right
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Think of how
All
many
those photos,
how
those
many
videos.
cases we have now jumped on since Brown and Ferguson and on and all the others.
And that 17-year-old girl with Floyd.
If we didn't have those iPhones with taking photographs, this wouldn't have taken off.
Right.
And I think that's been underestimated, and I think that that's the whole issue of transparency.
Right.
And as long as the apartheid people in government in South Africa could just quietly get away with their horrible control of the black population, it'd still be going on now, but they couldn't. And
Well, to a certain extent, it does exist.
well, there's still lots of problems
Here.
in South Africa. Oh
Here.
yes, everywhere, of course.
Yes,
But I mean,
yeah.
just thinking of South Africa.
Yeah.
But they do have a democracy now, and that's huge.
Right.
Anyhow, we got a couple more. Do we have time?
We have about 5 minutes.
Oh,
About
okay.
4
Okay.
minutes.
Well,
4
This
minutes.
is the big march, the big global climate march in New York City.
Yeah.
Remember?
We think that was 2017.
17, yeah. And we came down the Weather Project in our costumes
Oh.
And stilts.
and stilts,
Yeah.
stilt walkers, and we sang. We marched a long time. And I remember I had a big tutu, and I was for my full costume, my biker boots, and we were so tired, and we just took the subway.
Yeah.
And it's New York.
Who cares if you got a tutu
nobody,
on?
Right.
nobody even
Right.
looked twice that I had this get up on.
Right.
I thought, oh, this is wonderful.
But you didn't have your great big Marie Antoinette.
No wig. I had a very big wig, white wig.
A cloud.
Yeah.
Anyhow, that was
Anyway.
a big march,
Yeah,
of
that
course,
was
as you all
huge
know.
in New York.
And the final thing we
Well,
wanted.
wait
sorry,
a second.
sorry,
No, I
sorry.
was just going to say, there were very celebrities. I think what's her name, Gloria Steinem was at this.
Well, that was at the women's march.
Yeah, but I think she appeared at this too.
Actually, I don't know.
And this
And
Well,
was-
and I think
Bill McKibben
that's,
and
that's
Mitt-
another really good point about what can happen now. The more people that are famous,
Yes,
celebrity,
yes.
have
Absolutely.
Yes.
influence that can get out on these issues.
Yes.
Really having some leadership to really be being a voice on these issues, I think, is critical. So that's another great point that you've raised about how to move your messages forward.
Yes. We need Brad Pitt to come along.
He might. He's very,
Oh
very
yeah.
socially conscious.
Yes. Quite. Anyway.
The last one we thought we'd talk about is something completely different. We were in our last years in New York, in Manhattan, before moving here. We became part of what was called the New Sanctuary Movement
Coalition.
Coalition. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
The New Sanctuary Coalition was trying to prevent the heavy-handed ICE capture of undocumented.
And what does ICE mean again?
The
Immigration
and
Customs.
customs enforcement.
enforcement.
Immigration and customs enforcement.
And you said it was part of the Homeland
It's
Security.
part of Homeland Security.
Yeah, or insecurity.
And as some of you or most of you may know, that's been a ongoing activity ever since Trump became president, and has increased in activity of rounding up people who may have a tiny small infraction in their past history, but it was enough to warrant a ICE arrest, sequestration in prisons, pending hearings, and then ultimately deportation. And what this group, this New Sanctuary group, has done a variety of ways to try to alleviate the condition of those people who were rounded up, and to be witness, to be present at the hearings. And so Nora and I went to more than you, I
Yes,
think.
you did
went
much
to
more,
a
yeah.
number of courthouse hearings in downtown Manhattan, where these people were brought in, or who had to come in for a yearly made a presence, a yearly presence with the authorities to acknowledge they are here on the allowed to be continued. Many of them have worked in the U.S. for 20 years, 30 years,
Right.
paid taxes, good citizens, had children,
Who are citizens.
Right.
who are citizens, did all the right things, and now because they didn't have the proper papers, or they may have had a small police infraction of some kind, are now being rounded up. And I saw one case of a guy being brought in from a prison 30 or 40 miles outside of New York City, orange jumpsuit, manacles,
Manacle.
and he was so distraught after, and he'd been in that prison for months, waiting court hearings. This was in a regular courthouse, New York City. Our purpose there was to bear witness silently. There's usually about 10 of us, and pro bono lawyers who were really amazingly good to try to force the ICE lawyers to make their case and to try to prevent what seemed to us to be really incredibly heavy-handed, if not illegal or quasi-legal actions. And just being present, being witness was enough. And we feel we made a difference. We were told we made a difference.
Well, and I think that translates really well to now.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, a similar coalition.
Well, it's going
could
on
be-
right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it could be created for, you know, not just the ICE detainees, but, you know, anyone that might be wrongfully imprisoned or targeted, you know.
That's right.
Certainly there's a lot of that, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Being
Yeah,
suggested
people who
at
can't
this
afford
time.
bail, for example.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, this has really been remarkable. I mean, you have had such experience, and it totally inspires me personally to figure out a way that I can become active on an issue that's important to me. If residents or staff wanted to have further conversations with you about any of your experiences,
Oh.
would you be open to that?
Oh, we
Love
love
it,
We
love
love
it,
it.
yes.
Sure,
Good,
yeah.
great. Well, this has been great. I thank you very much.
Well, thank you,
Thank
Michelle.
you, Michelle.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good.